All right.
All right. I'm hitting go live. You're live. Ta-da! We've done it with less hiccups than last time.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Only a minute late.
It's almost like we're professional or something.
Slowly but surely.
Alrighty. Do we want to give it a couple minutes in preamble or just kick it?
I'll just kick it. I'm sure we can just watch it, or people will end up listening to this anyway. I'm not sure if anyone's.
Yeah. I mean, this will go live as a podcast just like the last one did. So if you're late, don't worry. You can always rewind the video once it's over. But over the weekend, Joe, you had finished Cyberpunk Edgerunners and immediately got excited about it. Yep. And I'd already watched it and have known of Cyberpunk because if you're a gamer, Cyberpunk 2077, released by CD Projekt Red, famously known for producing Witcher 3, which is another fantastic game, but unanimously took the ire of the internet during the pandemic as a gaming company. But over, I think about a month ago, Cyberpunk Edgerunners on Netflix was released, and they also simultaneously released an update for the game of the same name. And this show has seemed to turn the tide of the negative press that CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk has gotten over the last year, which is wild. And
okay, so when did the game come out?
In 2020, I believe.
Okay.
Let me.
So in about 2020, the game came out. I remember seeing trailers for it and being stoked about the game. And then when the game came out, a bunch of people complaining because there were glitches and it wasn't holding up to what their expectations were.
And that buggy mess is at the highest level.
And was shocking because of how well that particular studio had done with The Witcher. Though it sounds like they turned it around. I mean, everyone that I hear talking about it now says that it's awesome.
Yeah, and a lot of it came down to, this is kind of like insider baseball, but if you're a gamer and you like Cyberpunk, you probably already know some of this, but the problem with the game was basically that they were spread too thin with trying to produce a game, like a next-gen game, but make it compatible for all versions of the hardware. So you basically had to make the game work on multiple platforms, two of which were the PS4 and the Xbox Series X. Or I might be getting that wrong. Xbox One, maybe. I don't remember what it's called anymore. It's been so long since I played Xbox.
Yeah.
But in any case, those are 10-year-old hardware, and you're trying to make a game that is running the newest, graphic fidelity and all that kind of stuff. You're effectively trying to make two different versions of the game that are completely comparable, but you're kind of toning down the hardware, not dials,
right.
But
and
so it makes it double
crunch.
Work. Right.
You're on a time crunch. You're trying to make, in some sense, multiple different versions of the same game. I don't know how big of a studio they are.
I don't know off the top of my head.
That they make is The Witcher, right? Besides this now.
Yeah, they did The Witcher, and that was their biggest game for a long time. And they really hadn't done too much else. Like, the history of the studio itself, CD Projekt Red, was a Polish porting company. And so what that means is basically they would get the rights of other games that were like from Sony or other consoles back in the day, and they would do their job to basically take the localization and port it over to Polish or something like that, until they got the rights for the Witcher games, which they did Witcher 1, 2, and then 3 being their kind of breakout successor.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking at this. So this is the list of their games. Like, yeah. I mean, the first game that was theirs, 2007, The Witcher.
Yeah.
Then it's The Witcher 2, a bunch of different variations and DLC. Same thing with Witcher 3, and then Cyberpunk in 2020.
So producing their own content, they've really never done this before, or rather, they're newer to it than other massive studios.
Yeah, I really wonder how big of a company they are. I'm not going to spend all night trying to figure that out, but I'm curious.
I'm just giving some preamble so people who are interested in the histories of this stuff, because I think it shows too that the level of care and what they're building in Cyberpunk isn't just something that's like, oh, we just have this cool IP, let's just do something with it. That is kind of rampant in creative domains right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really nice. It makes me think more and more that all the creativity, the real artistry, has migrated out of traditional media and into gaming. It's the original artwork, the creativity and narrative. The Last of Us was a amazing narrative,
Oh
like
yeah.
really subtle and brilliant. And I mean, the Netflix is making. I think it's Netflix is making a
It's HBO. HBO's doing the show.
HBO. Okay, that gives me hope actually
Yeah.
that it's HBO.
And it's the guy who plays the Mandalorian. I forget his name. How did I?
Yeah,
He's dope.
I don't know if I like that pick for that character, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
Point,
it is what it is, right?
right. The broader point here is that a lot of the originality and creativity seems to have moved into the gaming world, and the
Yep.
fact that this show is as successful as it is indicative of the fact that this is the case. That same thing with Arcane, the other
Yep. I was
successful
gonna bring that up. You read my mind.
um, show on Netflix that won an Emmy. I think it won an Emmy
Yeah.
for
It
best
did.
animated. Right, that's based off of another video game. I think that the writers on these come from the gaming studios too, or at least they're
Yeah.
yeah.
Arcane did. Arcane is insane. So if for those interested in Arcane, and we could probably do a whole separate episode on Arcane, we should put a pin in that and not go too deep. But there's a series on Netflix called Bridging the Rift, and it's all about, it's like 5 episodes that are about a half hour to 30 or 40 minutes, like 30, 40 minutes, maybe long, kind of breaking down every aspect of the journey to take a video game IP, like taking characters from a video game that you really don't have, the full 360 narrative of them, and saying, okay, how do we not only live up to the fan expectations that have spent hours and hours with these characters, but also make it a compelling story for those people who don't have the background knowledge of playing these characters in a game,
Yeah.
and also make it exciting and all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, at least with Riot Games, who is the parent of the animation studio that did it, is called Fortiche. They're in France, and they are a spin-off of Riot. They're parented to them and have worked with all the trailers, and everything they've done is from the ground up as an animation studio. They're not just some outsider animation studio that's like, hey guys, we need you to do this, right? Like it's this like way different idea, and my camera is tracking me now. There we go, fix it. So it's like this, to me, it's really exciting to see this, because you get a whole bunch of creators who really, really, really care about the core audience and how to translate these characters beyond the medium which they were born.
I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree that that's happening. I see. Perhaps we could provide contrast to this, right? Well, it isn't that all creative writing and the kind of artistry, even visual arts, have left film or television. That's definitely not the case. But you have a proliferation of sort of novel. How do you? It's not novel, but not original content. And so, if what novelty is simply unseen before, like that, there's some version of this that's, oh, this hasn't happened. But original is something like pushing the genre forward in an interesting way, and really, it's new in that it extends the culture beyond where it is, where novelty is new but entirely contained within the culture. And you have this novel content. I'm getting this from these distinctions between newness and novelty from Ian McGilchrist, who looks at the differences between the hemispheres of the brain. In the right hemisphere, newness, this originality, and it sees things in context, and it builds up off of what the old thing was and creates something unique and tries to answer a question or something like this. Whereas novelty can't actually generate anything new on its own accord. It comes from the left hemisphere. It deals with abstractions. It deals with what the right hemisphere gives it. So instead of being able to generate something new, all it can do is take a bunch of things and mix them up in some sense. And so you can have the Lord of the Rings in a new series, but it's totally not new. It's just novel. It's like, okay, well, we can put, any checkbox of identities thrown into, or any number of identities to check off boxes into the show and masquerade as if this is something creative or original or interesting.
Right.
And so
it's like reskinning something, right? Like to kind of simplify it, it's like you have like the shape of a thing, right? Like you could say, like taking your car and giving it a different look, right? Like covering it with leaves to camouflage it, quote unquote. The core essence of that thing is still a car. You can't say it's a bush. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like that's the problem with a lot of like the shortcutted way of media.
Yeah,
like
and it's
cutting corners.
even worse. Like to carry on with your analogy, it's even worse because the central core of the artwork, the original artwork, has decayed. Right, it's not even there anymore. So it's like putting 20-inch rims on a rust bucket and pretending like you bought a new car. That's bullshit.
It's good as new.
Right, and a lot of these shows are just remakes, reruns, rehashes of old ideas that are uninteresting with a new paint job on top of it and pretending like it's unique or spectacular. And they're just and not to go too far into the weeds on this, but when you criticize the show for that's what it is, they use their camouflage paint and is sort of like a battering. How do you even say this? It's like they actually use the political check boxes as camouflage for bad writing or cover for bad writing. That like when the criticisms come, then they say, oh, well, you just don't like this because you don't like the identity group we included. Therefore, you're any number of phobias that you want to say. And it's a slur against the audience and the critics of a bad show when it has nothing to, it's disingenuous. It has nothing to do with that at all, besides the fact that people are calling it out for being cheap.
Right. For not following through with what the audience, right? I think people forget in some sense, like whenever you create a thing, and I think this will be a perfect way to like segue directly into Cyberpunk, but whenever you create a thing, regardless of what the creator's intentions were, the audience themselves are going to come up with some sort of idea of what the essence of your thing is, right? Like the essence of Star Wars or the essence of Lord of the Rings, or in the case of what we've been talking about with animation is like the essence of Arcane and League of Legends and the essence of Cyberpunk. And so if you diverge too far from those things, people respond, not to do a pandemic analogy, but like an immune system. And they're not going to be able to really articulate why, but they're going to be mad and they're going to be angry and they're going to like almost feel like rabid in some sense, like and it's fair that the creators and the other side of this are going to like respond in a really defensive posturing, and it's not to give them an out, but it's just human nature, right? And it's how we treat these stories and things because we internalize them. It's we can't help but think in narrative.
Yeah. And people love these things. These are things people love and that have a meaning to them that actually matters, right? It matters that we fall in love with certain characters because they teach us to be something more than what we are, to be better, to give us a star to point at, right? These things matter. But when you play with these things, these characters that people have resonated with, these worlds that people love, as if they have no meaning, then you're sort of how do you even say it? You're almost like an iconoclast.
Mm-hmm.
something sacred, a sacred image, and you're breaking it. And of course, people are going to respond negatively to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I sent you this text earlier today, but in a different context. But it's like once an idea it gets a certain level of recognition or has been around long enough, right? Like in older stories that have been with us for 40, 50, 60 years, we have to, I think, instead of just looking at them as old and outdated and we might need to revise them to better match our current sentiment. I think we should look at them as like archaeological artifacts and say, hey, this may not reflect today's period, but it reflects something that's still universal about today, like human experience at a higher level. And we have to be proper stewards of these ideas as learning tools, but it doesn't have to say anything about us today. It could just be what it is.
Yeah. And one of the things that's necessary about narrative is that it allows us to express timeless things about the human condition. And that if you want to update something, if you want to update The Lord of the Rings, if you want to update any show that you're thinking about, if you want to update Cyberpunk, because it came from a role, like a tabletop game that was called Cyberpunk 2020, and then they made the game in 2020 that was called Cyberpunk 2077. So God only knows what will happen in 2077. But if you want to do that, what you do is you can update the world to some degree to reflect the conditions of our time, and then ask, what are people like under those conditions? Now, a fantasy world is a little harder because fantasy is already divorced enough from reality by definition that it gives it a lot of freedom to express metaphorically human experiences in a way that something that's like a historical drama or something can't. It's too concrete in some sense. But all of this is to say, as a preface, that our culture right now has a problem where it has a newness and novelty problem. Newness is a genuine originality that builds off of the old, and novelty is the subversion of expectations, and it's a bunch of tricks and games to mimic true originality. Things like the new Lord of the Rings show are an example of that. But Cyberpunk Edgerunners is totally original in the newness sense, that it really nails a genre. It moves the genre in an interesting way. And it even blends things because it's an anime. It's also, and it's a cyberpunk thing. And obviously, even in like Blade Runner, one of the classic cyberpunk movies, there's this kind of strange Eastern and Western blending where you hear Chinese being spoken or Japanese being spoken in the streets with neon Atari like advertisements going on. And this kind of turns that up by making it an anime. It is now very Japanese, even more so than the other ones. But it's cool. So that's initial thoughts. I thought the show overall was very interesting. It had enough. It was very interesting. I really like the narrative. I like the characters. It starts out sort of like just a typical anime, but it grows. I like the animation. Okay, I think at times it's whatever. Anything that they did with the 3D cars, I was like, oh god.
You didn't like it?
No, it just didn't look like physics. It didn't look like physics. It looked silly, and often it took me out of the
Yeah, they definitely weren't doing the physics, or they were playing with physics. They were being very anime, right? Like they just said, yeah, they're in a car, but we're just gonna do things however we want to, like jumping over things or or whatever.
Yeah.
I have to agree though with what you said with how it started. I think it did. It started out very typical anime and kind of, and I don't know where, I kind of, like I said, I rewatched some of this in prior to doing this so that I could have it more fresh in my mind. And part of me was like curious why it's kind of had like a slow burn for the first few episodes. and I don't know if that was just because they're trying to find the voice of the show or not alienate like an anime audience too fast because of the direction they wanted to go later on, because it is pretty over the top in
Oh yeah,
like this the stylization toward the midpoint to and through the climax of the show for
yeah.
this season.
It is
um
certainly an adult show,
yes, that's
right?
the other
It
thing I was
does
going to bring up.
not. It is gory as hell. There's nudity, people taking drugs, all kinds of
It's
stuff.
very real, like a lot of times in like cyberpunk or dystopian things, you kind of get like the upper echelon type stuff. Like you get like, what is it like to be the rich person and things like that, and they barely talk about poor people, or maybe they show like just sweeping shots of the ghetto or things like that, right? Like they don't really immerse you in it. And in this show, you're basically in it from the moment it starts to the moment it ends, and you get like this bottom up viewpoint of what it's like to live in this kind of society. And I
Mm.
don't know if this is like the right way to put it, but like I told you this yesterday, it feels like capitalism turned all the way up to 11.
Mm.
It's like, what happens when we let these megacorps, or as they call them in the show, they call them megacorps, but like corporations we would see today, you just let them keep doing what they're gonna
Yeah.
do.
I thought
And
about this a lot. This was a huge theme that popped out for me, and I'm so happy you talked about this. So it's like, um, that was absolutely what I was seeing. I was seeing, this show to me got some response where people were like, "Whoa, this is crazy," and look at how cool that is. But this didn't strike me as cool at all. This struck me as horrifying. And that what was going on, what they're in some sense warning about, just talking about imagining this up, is that there's this. It's like already we have corporations that have realized that human beings are a resource to be exploited, and instead of oil barons drilling on native lands, you have Facebook drilling into like your mind to extract your attention.
yeah.
Okay, human beings in that regard, in that philosophy, are not seen as people. They're seen as natural resources or minerals or whatever, what have you, right? So there's this extension of territory, like acceptable commodities, the extension of the territory of acceptable commodities into human beings themselves. That's what we have already right now, and the consequences are things like the increased cutting and suicide rates of teenage girls as a result of Instagram. Okay, so children are dying so that a mega corporation can make money off of their attention. Okay, that's now. That's right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so you play that long enough, and it turns out your attention isn't the only thing that can be commodified. If they can convince you to trade in your human arm for a robotic arm, then Apple can put out a new iArm 18 or 19 every year. And unless you upgrade, you're falling behind. And so in the same way, now they can use your body as a means of commodities and making a profit. And you just keep playing that game until like multiple characters. And I think Adam Smasher he's not the main villain, but he's like this background villain that shows up at the end. Very interesting character. You've replaced your entire being, and that you're just a machine,
Right.
and there's nothing human left about you.
Got it. This discussion is like, it's like the sweet spot for me, because I've loved the idea of transhumanism. That's what you're talking about. Like, or where this is rootedly philosophically, is where's the line of human go? As we use more and more technologies, how, like, at what point do you cease to be a human anymore and become something other than just human, right? Um, it's almost like, where's your soul? If you say you just change everything about you, that like all the biology, flesh and bone, and all that remains is maybe like your brain. Are you human?
I mean, I would say, like, I mean, if one, this is a problem because your brain and your body aren't separate things, and your body does
Exactly.
a lot of thinking, actually, right? It's not thinking that you are conscious of, right? It's unconscious information processing that's occurring. But these two things are not separate things. Like, for example, there's studies that now are showing that there's a connection between your gut flora, so the bacteria in your stomach, and depression. Okay, so the way that you're thinking is being impacted by your digestive system.
Yep.
So if you replace your digestive system with some kind of weird computer version, presumably that will change the way that you think. So they're becoming less human with every piece you lose. Okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that people seem to think that we're more compartmentalized than we are. Human beings aren't just human beings. A human being is a mammal and a great ape and a human being. And that these are stacked layers of that have accrued off during the evolutionary process to produce an emergent property that is the human being in total. That we aren't just human, we're human and our entire lineage. It's just that that process is what we mean really by humanity. So if you start removing bits of that process, or you replace all the people with the computer stuff, then what you've done isn't allowed for the human process to continue into the future. You've disrupted it and replaced it with something entirely new, because it doesn't preserve the remaining of the thing, or the beginning road. That whole trajectory is annihilated. So that's, I think you just lose the person entirely. And what scares me about the world of Cyberpunk and where I think we might be heading if we keep playing this game, and that we don't understand what consciousness is. We just don't understand it. That what might happen is that if consciousness is an emergent property that's dependent on a bunch of biological interactions that we don't understand, and we continue to replace people part by part by part, what might happen is that even if these computers are so sophisticated, you can't tell the difference between computer Joe and original biological Joe, at some point you'll replace one more part and I'll turn off. But that you'll be given a zombie version of me, this machine automata with no experience whatsoever, then you can't distinguish between lights on and lights out, masquerading as Joe Jakowski, when in reality, I'm dead.
But it's fine, Joe. The megacorps will just tell you how to behave.
At that point, there won't be people. All that you'll have is a dystopian nightmare where all human beings are dead. No one, and it's just a bunch of lifeless machine zombies walking around interacting with each other as if they're living things. The end. And we've just commodified ourselves out of existence.
Yeah. I mean, we effectively turn ourselves into the robots, right? Or rather, like some sort of pseudo hive mind where there is no agency, but it's just
a machine.
Yeah, it's just whatever the machine thinks you should be doing, right? And I honestly got this sense of like the negativity in this show, or rather the dystopian of this show. It's pretty pervasive, because it's like at one level you could think about it at this philosophical level, but then you could look at it just how like the struggles of the people. And it's like you could either be like a cog in the machine, and so you're either someone who lives in the gutter and you're just there until something bad happens to you because you're caught in some sort of conflict. You join a gang, or you're somewhere in the middle, either as like the corporate lapdog guy, I can't remember his name, who's the fixer is what his title is, and he's basically just like
Faraday.
Faraday, there you go. I knew it was an electrical concept, but I couldn't remember who. But you have Faraday, who's kind of like the middleman, where he gets paid by the big corporate stuff, and then you have the Edgerunners or cyberpunks, who are kind of like these pseudo rebellious autonomous people who kind of fight and scrape to be top dog, whatever that means. But it comes at a cost of you have to sacrifice your body and augment yourself to accomplish these missions because the adversaries you're going to go against are doing the exact same thing. So you get this like small scale arms race of who's upgrading themselves more and more until you basically go fucking insane, because that's the only outcome that and the stakes of this are literally thrown in front of you in episode 1, and you don't even really understand it because it's so like what am I watching? Yeah. But like the psychological stakes of what this game does to people and why you shouldn't want to play it are really apparent, but it takes you a second to kind of get up to speed. And I think it's what makes this show great, because it's by the end of the show, you kind of sit there and you're like, oh God.
What this whole thing led to, huh?
Yeah.
And it's the same, obviously spoilers for people that are missing because we're going to talk about the end, but
yes.
It's the same symbolically, narratively as Darth Vader. Because
oh wow,
Anakin is a flesh and blood human being and is ostensibly a good kid. And then his mom dies, so he loses somebody that he loves. And then he has the risk of losing somebody else that he loves, right? Now, he becomes desperate to have power over life and death.
Yeah, reality.
Right. He wants to be able to prevent the death of the person he loves. But this concept becomes all turned up. So it goes, Star Wars asks the question, what happens to somebody who wants power over life and death? And the answer is you lose your humanity, or he gets piece by piece replaced with machine parts. You become a monster because Anakin as Darth Vader confuses this sort of mastery of death with manipulation of death. It's like in his soul, he thinks that the killing of all these people and that he can do this with impunity, with ease and throwing things around, is a symbol. It's reflecting back to him the fact that he has power over this thing. Right? The action of murder for him is a display of his delusional control over life and death. So he becomes a machine. He loses his humanity and he becomes a monster. And he still loses everyone he loves. Except for his son. And there's a whole part in redemption arc. Blah, blah, blah.
You make the deal with the devil, right?
Okay, so the main character, David, is a young man who loses his mother. So
who's now a great person, by the way, in a terrible world.
Yeah, a good person, ostensibly good person in a terrible world. And he's trapped by something like a slightly different problem, which is he still wants, like Anakin has Padme to save, he has Lucy, right? And he succeeds in that regard. She doesn't die. But the consequence is still that he slowly loses his humanity, starts to go insane, right? He becomes an addict, right? He's an addict to this like power thing that's going on.
Power fantasy.
And it results in his total. The cool thing I liked about the show is that it isn't progress. It looks like progress in that he's putting on all this armor, but it isn't healing. He never heals from his mom. He never does whatever. And you can see that when, as in the tip of his insanity, when he's losing his humanity again, it's a regression. And like Oedipus, he returns back to his mother again as he's standing on top of the Arasaka Tower, losing his mind, saying, "Look, Mom, I made it to the top." Right? He's still trapped.
Wow.
Under her aegis, under her like power over him. His mother's got all the power over him. He's still infantile boy at the moment that he dies. He never
He never like
overcomes.
reconciled with the loss of his mother.
Yes.
Even after everything.
He never reconciles the loss with his mother. He never gets out from under her shadow and her expectations of him. It just never happens. He's living her dream the entire time. And it becomes evident at the very end when he's turned himself into some psychotic thing. He's mutilated himself to achieve this moment.
He's
says
barely
it.
even human at the very end. Like he's just a torso in a giant mechanical like arms and legs, you know? Like he's barely even who he is anymore, or barely recognizable as a human.
Yeah, and he follows the Oedipus myth great. because it's like it might be, yeah, he follows the Oedipus thing great. Like he goes out there, he runs away from the fates are another example of this kind of maternal thing, but they're associated with like obviously the mother in that story, because the fates say that Oedipus will sleep with his mother. He says absolutely not, and he runs away, and then he returns right back to her at the end of that thing. And so it's not, he doesn't sleep with his mom, but what happens is he still has a reunification with the maternal domain, the psychological maternal domain, right before he dies.
Interesting.
He's a failed hero. He doesn't progress.
I kind of saw a slightly different like prophecy when he first meets Lucy. And the one quote where she's like hesitant to kind of like welcome him into this cyberpunk edgerunner way of life, because she's like, you don't seem like this kind of person. Like she's like, I don't know if, like, it's almost like she's regretful because she feels guilty already because she knows how this ends. And basically she says, he's like, in this city, being a cyberpunk or being an edgerunner, it's not about how you live, it's about how you die. And I was like, oh God.
If
this
she
is
knows
in episode 3, by the way. that this
She knows exactly what he is. She knows exactly what he needs. She's a very good example of an anima, because the Jungian anima is the part of yourself that entices you into development. In under healthy conditions, you can have anima possession, where you basically think of yourself as that thing. You conflate yourself, your whole self, with the experience of the anima, and that can create a whole bunch of different problems. But one of which is that you'll have a very like effete or effeminate male who's kind of soft in the way that the anima will speak to him softly, or a very like masculine and like combative almost female if she's animus possessed. Jung thought that there was an animus in women and anima in men. Okay. But in story, the anima is presented as the thing that pulls you forward. It entices you into development. It's the goal. It's Ariadne, because it's Ariadne's thread and Ariadne. Ariadne is this woman that's enticing Theseus forward through the labyrinth with this golden flickering thing that captures his attention to pull him forward. Okay, so Lucy's glowing
she does
hair
that multiple times.
she is this glowing thing that's capturing his attention, and she tells him what he needs to do and what he needs not to do. You can call the anima literally means soul, and we get words like to animate, right? To be animated is to come alive, right? To have a soul, right? And so she's his soul telling him this is a bad idea for you. And then when he goes along with it anyway, she's trying to like get him to grow up and like do these things. And like, I just want you, like,
she's like, I just want you. I don't need you to do anything for me. Right. Like
he fails as a hero because he stays trapped. She should entice him away from his mother. She doesn't. That fails to occur. He ostensibly goes for her, but ultimately regresses back into the mother character, and the anima moves on. Right? If he had a real union with her, he would have left the game and they would have gone off to the moon together, but that didn't happen. Right. Instead, he's on the top of the tower losing his mind right before he gets dismembered, which is another totally mythological thing. This always happens before these mythological characters reunify with their figure, they're usually lose their minds and are dismembered. And so the same thing happens in the show. He gets pulled apart limb by limb, and then he gets killed.
That's ridiculous and disturbing. But also this show doesn't pull any punches, as we've probably outlined.
And that's what happens to real people. Real people, what they'll do is if they stagnate, they'll stay in the same place, they become lethargic, and their identity, their force, their motive force is dissolved in a vat of nothingness. Right? So they are decomposed. Their self is decomposed, and they become as if they're dead. And in the past, it probably would have actually gotten you killed.
Walking corpses. I mean, honestly, the show does a great job of illustrating what it's like for those kinds of people, right? In the show, they call this cyberpsychosis, but the part I'm remembering, I think it's either episode 4 or 5, that homeless dude who's peeing into a barrel, and the one guy's antagonizing him, like, bro, I don't want you peeing out here in the street. Like, go do this somewhere else. And he just keeps pushing the buttons until this crazy guy loses it and blows his head off. And I mean, the whole setup for this episode is crazy, because it's like, it starts out with the scene of David seeing liquid droplets in slow-mo. You don't have any context for this until like halfway through the episode, and then you're like, oh, I get it now. But David freezes again, and he does this multiple times, and kind of going back to what you're saying about being trapped by the visions of his mother and things like that, he clearly has PTSD from the experiences of how his mother died tragically.
Yeah.
And it's like almost every time there's like this extreme violence, up until when he kind of reconciles the violence and kind of takes on the role as leader of the squad. He doesn't care. Like, the violence is what, like, he's like totally numb to it at a point. But it's like, I kept seeing these like moments in like the first half of the show where you're just like, God damn it, he's got it. It's like I could feel the pain, but then he was clearly not like resolving those things or even having an outlet for those things, because like every time it would come up in talking with another person, or he just would brush it away in some way, or just go on to the next important thing, whatever that was. And it's like screaming at you in the face. You're like, this is going to end bad.
Yeah. And I love that they didn't pull any punches, that it does end bad. That they don't it's very violent, and it's stylized violence. And maybe you might say that in some way that's glorifying it. But in the end of the day, the fact that it still happens to all the characters you love is like a stark reminder that, this is terrifying. It's like, is that the world you want to live in? Is that really what you're looking forward to? If we don't wake up to where we're heading with what we've done with our technology just now, we will sleepwalk into a nightmare.
Right. It's like Dodo's walking off to the cliff, right? Like, we don't know what's coming. And if we just keep blindly walking forward, we're going to walk ourselves right off.
Yeah.
And it might not be like there's a chance we walk off the cliff and it's like nothing, right? It could be like pillows or something. But there's also a really good chance that it's like a lava pit or shark infested waters, or
there is no chance whatsoever that we walk, as far as I'm concerned, that you walk off the cliff and it's pillows. You don't get anywhere good on accident, but you can get a lot of horrible places on accident. And so what it looks like to me is that part of why I like the show and why I like most shows is because it's indicative of something that's going on. And that what's happening right now is we have a proliferation of abstract information that is apparently of no consequence, so that I can go on 8chan with a bunch of maniacs and post the most vile shit. And it's all a silly game, right? And even when one of those people snaps and videotapes live video mass shooting, as has happened, on that forum, people will be going, oh, hell yeah, dude, nice reload. As if the whole thing is an inconsequential game. Okay? We have become so sick because we've been inundated with it's deceitfully inconsequential bullshit, in that it is consequential, but because of its nature, it tricks us into thinking it means nothing. People say Twitter isn't real life, but what they should say is Twitter isn't a representative sample of the population. But there are consequences to Twitter, in that it's, at very least, exacerbating the fury of our politics,
right,
that are certainly real. It is real life.
And it holds the attention span of people who are important decision makers in the world.
Yes. And it directs their actions, and you have news media outlets next to what a senator says, posting 5 random tweets from who the fuck knows, as if this is news, as if that person is a geopolitical analyst that I should be listening to. That's Joe Schmo from down the street. He's drunk every Tuesday. Why should I listen to anything he says? This is absurd. We've elevated faceless idiots online to the status of pundit, and now our pundits look like faceless idiots. And we're playing this game as if it's all bullshit, as if none of this fucking matters, as if all this is just some silly joke, and it just clicks on a mouse and type it on a keyboard. But this is an illusion that is covering our eyes as we walk one step at a time to the edge. If we don't wake the fuck up, we're going to be in a really bad place. And this show, I thought, did a good job of illustrating one of the nightmare places we could end up.
Yeah. I mean, it's the dangers of gamifying too much, right? Because we've taken the idea of gamification things where like everything's just about number go up, right? I mean, I'm being tongue in cheek by saying that, but that's how people treat these things, right? It's like, oh, well, I have 10,000 new followers today, or I have, X amount of new likes or whatever, right? Like you just can play these games without realizing that what you say and do on platforms can impact real people, right? And it's the same thing, like thinking about edge cases, right? Or where technology can go with what you're saying, to kind of pull it back to the show, is around like AR and VR, where in the show they have a thing called BDs, or brain dances. And what these basically are kind of like, just imagine VR on steroids, but they're recordings for the most part. And you just basically put on a visor and you can feel and witness the POV of another person. And in the show, they have what are called XBDs, which are like explicit or illegal BDs. And these are like all the way up until the moment someone dies, or pornographic type things, or you name it, right? And it's like not out of the realm of possibility to think that that would be a real thing in 5 years, if not sooner.
Yeah.
Like
this is horrifying. I mean, think about just the porn industry already, right? You have a handful of streaming sites that put out an inordinate amount of video that they can't keep up with, just like YouTube. Nobody can keep up with it, what's on there, right? But they have rules like no child pornography, no violent stuff, no bestiality, all this horrendous, like twisted shit. It can't get on there. But there's some fucking website that's out there, right? And as this progresses, we're already seeing VR pornography occurring, right? So you can just get yourself more into this fake world where it's even more more bullshit. That's what we need, more bullshit.
More noise.
And it's like, okay, so think of Midjourney. So Midjourney is an AI that you can put in prompts, and it pulls from images from across the internet to generate an image that approximates your prompt. So I can say Eric Wenzel, and maybe it won't actually do this because there's not enough photos of him, or of you. Eric Wenzel. Oh, it'll pull up all the photos of Eric Wenzel. It'll amalgamate them together, and now we have a new picture of Eric Wenzel. Okay. But we can say Eric Wenzel skydiving, and then it takes all the skydiving photos and all the Wenzel photos and it throws them together and doing a skydiving even though you've never been. But Midjourney has rules about no pornography, no violence, no these things. So it bans some prompts. But somebody who knows that they can make money off of this in a year from now with an equally powerful AI is going to allow for that. And then any number of sick fantasies are going to get in there. But then they're going to say, oh, well, we have a porn Midjourney. It's the new Pornhub Midjourney, like AI that can generate any image.
I guarantee you some website out there's already working on this algorithm thing that's like going to be real freaking good at it.
Guaranteed. And when they have boundaries, somebody else who's even a little more unscrupulous is going to even remove even more of the barriers. And then you're going to have all manner of sick shit flooding people. Yeah. And this is, you could, in another 5 years, they're going to be able to do it with video. You're going to have videos that are going to be generated in the same way, using AI in the same way, and it'll get more and more and more sick, and it'll get better and better VR, and then suddenly you have XBDs just like in this fucking game, in this show.
And they don't even need to be real anymore. Like, you won't even need to make real memories. It'll be, pseudo, hyper realistic POV things, right? Like, I mean, I could already see this going into the video game world, like we started this discussion on, where you just put on a goggle set and you'll be like you're on, some battlefield that never actually existed, but it'll basically look and feel just like it's real, right? Like, and you'll get real good at reloading in a video game, right? Like I could just imagine it, right? Like add in some haptic gloves, and all of a sudden it feels like you're actually gripping this stock, and who knows, maybe we'll figure out some way to like do heat so you could feel like your barrel heating up or something. I don't know, but
and imagine what will happen to people when they can practice committing mass murder, right, in a way that's inconsequential, such that it tricks their monkey brain into thinking that this would be. It makes the moment that the illusion becomes indistinguishable from reality when you put on that headset, then reality becomes indistinguishable from a fantasy.
Right.
And if you've been practicing doing some nightmarish shit in the fantasy world, that will bleed into reality.
And that's a perfect point to bring up, because when David is put through that BD where he is going through like cyberpsychosis, like he's experiencing it for himself, like he's not playing a character, it's actually him acting things out.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, here's like, to me, it felt like if you have a foundation, right? Like a building. And in this case, the foundation of that building is David's psyche. And he's being tested in a sense of like, hey, let's see what happens if we put you under this extreme psychological stress. Oh, look, he's cracking like any normal human being would. And you make it into a freaking game to see how many times can we go until you break. It's almost like living in a society where you're under extreme psychological pressure. It's just a matter of time before you break, right? And that's like the problem with all of this stuff. And it's almost like a tangential problem to this is most people don't have a governing system. Like the way I think about it is like in cars or in a lot of technology, the designers themselves put in limit switches such that a piece of equipment, maybe it can go fast like a car, right? Like a car can go until the engine destroys itself and rips itself apart. But that's really bad design if you just let it do that, because then you have to replace a whole car and possibly danger a whole bunch of people if it has a catastrophe like that. So a lot of times in technology, you engineer in limit switches so that you can govern to safely operate a piece of equipment. But with all of this proliferation of technology and information explosion and whatnot, there is no limit switch that each individual has installed in their brain. You could just sit in front of YouTube or TikTok or any of these other things and just let things autoplay 24/7. And you just lose your fucking mind, because the more you watch, the more it learns what you like, and it's just like, well, I'm just going to give you more of what you like. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm giving you what you want. And it pretends to be, hat in hand, I'm doing you a service. When in reality, it's not. And it's up to the individual to decide how best to govern themselves. But right now, nobody's doing that. There's nobody who's taken the responsibility to help people make that governor. It's wild.
And like the problem that I'm like personally that I'm more and more like trying to stick down, like trying to really focus on to deal with is the problem that I think one of the reasons people aren't taking responsibility for things is a meaning issue.
Mm-hmm.
Is that there's a meaning crisis, but I think and there's a lot of people talking the meaning crisis and the death of God and all this. I understand this, but I think that one of the smarter people than me are handling that piece. I suspect that an additional issue is this continued proliferation of abstractness that is because it creates things that are seemingly of no consequence. It is meaningless. And so there is meaningless. This is adding to the meaning crisis. That I mean, Baudrillard talks about this, that as you have this procession of simulacrum, for those that don't know, Baudrillard was a French philosopher. I think he wrote this in the 80s. It's Simulation and Simulacrum is the name of the book. And he's talking about how if you have copies of copies of copies of copies, you slowly get away from the original to the point where not only is the copy so far from reality, but you have so many copies that are so far from reality that you can't see reality whatsoever. You're totally obscured by all the advertisements in Times Square, such that you wonder if trees ever grew there at all. And that the reality of the situation is so obscured by all of this that nothing feels real, nothing feels meaningful. And so it puts you in a state of nihilism. And that state of nihilism and meaninglessness as a result of the constant inundation of information is killing us. And the way you fix that is genuine connection, not pseudo connection like Facebook, but because abstract things are pulled out of context, right? That's their nature, right? The number one isn't one can of LaCroix. That is a concrete one thing. But one as a symbol can mean any number of things. That gives it power because it's abstract, but it also removes it from its context. And if you do that with enough people where they're removed from their context, they're just isolated. They're just isolated, alone, and nihilistic and miserable. And now they think in their misery that no action they take is of any consequence. Why not do any number of horrendous things that are not going to help?
Yeah.
So you fix that by reconnecting. You reestablish the context between things. And if you can rebuild that fabric, then you can start to subdue the abstractness.
It's an interesting concept because there's another quote toward the end of the show where Lucy takes David outside of the city for the first time ever. You know, and it's interesting because it's almost like some of this can feel like it has a gravitational pull, right? Like it's inevitable to just spiral out into this crazy nothingness or whatever you want to call it, right? Nihilistic dystopian nightmare. That's a whole lot of negative words all stringed together. I never thought I'd put in a sentence, but here we are. And you know, and she even says it, and he's like, it looks like it's like a prison of light. And it's like this false, it's like a false idol where you have this thing where it's like with all the glitz and circumstance and like, oh, well, you can get the new iPhone 24 for only an arm and a leg, right? Like, or whatever it is that captures your attention. And it's like, it doesn't mean that getting the next best thing is a bad thing. But what it does mean is we should be really careful about doubling down into the materialistic worldview that capitalism and these other systems want to push us toward. Because at the end of the day, those aren't the things that matter. Not really.
Yeah.
Like those things go away once you die, right? Like you don't bring those things with you. I mean, for all we know, you don't bring anything with you. So like putting that as your like thing to achieve with the time that you have here is a really it's a world in which you end up feeling like nothing matters anyways.
Yeah.
And
this is a warning. I'm so happy you brought that piece up too, because that remains symbolic. That symbolism in mythology is old as shit as well. That's the idea of too much light, of the deceitfulness of gold. Is like King Midas turns everything he touches into gold, right? So he's very powerful and creates value and wealth. Okay. But King Midas and we've done that with our abstract knowledge that's produced all this technology that's improved many people's lives, that it's incredibly powerful tech. But there are some things King Midas shouldn't touch, which he does, which is his family, so human beings. And he turns living things into gold, frozen gold, dead gold. And so he has all the material things in the world, all this thing, but now he's lost the thing that actually mattered. Okay.
People.
It's the same story as Darth Vader. It's the same story as David. It's what we're doing with our society if we're not careful. We'll turn everything into gold. There'll be no humanity left.
Yeah. I mean, as an engineer, I can't help but hope that we can't find a way and science our way to a better future. Like, because as someone who wears wearables and sees the early stages of some of these things, and not, I'm going to be honest, I really do think they provide useful information, but there is a danger here. And the other thing I would say too is like we all have these technologies. I mean, for instance, me and you, Joe, are using many systems to have this conversation. I brought this up before, and I always get meta with it. But the power we have as individuals in this society is ridiculous. But that's not to say that one day the people who've created these technologies, it's like the most real example I can give is having the keys to the nuclear launch codes, right? Like you can have that power, and that's all well and good because the people who first create that understand it, they're close enough to it and all that stuff. But you give it enough time, eventually someone who really doesn't have a good handle on what that means at a foundational level is going to be able to use that and not really be able to think through those things. And the unfortunate thing is I think that a lot of the technologies we have today have been given to people, the average person, who don't really stop and think about what it is they're actually using. And so that's why we have all of these struggles and growing pains that we do right now, because it is like you're giving the bull in the china shop free run of the place. You're letting people go online and just being like, well, let's go just talk about this and see what we can break.
Yeah.
or whatever. And it's and now we're seeing the issues that happens, right? Because like before, if we roll back the clock, not even very long, right? Probably the 80s, 70s, 80s. Maybe you had one or two town crazies, right? And you knew that, Earl, who's going to be at the bar on every Thursday and maybe on the week, like Sunday, because his wife kicked him out of the house because she couldn't handle his shit anymore. He was going to go say his ridiculous thing and nobody cared, right? Because that's just Earl. But now Earl can go find 10 of his other friends online and talk about their crazy things, and all of them are drinking the same Kool-Aid. Yep. And then you got, some people who are not quite as crazy as Earl, but, get introduced and they're like, maybe that does sound right.
Yeah. Facebook will offer you their crazy group. Be like, oh, you looked at this. Maybe you should look at this even crazier thing.
So it's like, it looks all well and good, but then once you start multiplying this by I always use this, but it's the law of large numbers, right? At small scale, things are manageable, right? Below 100 people, whatever. You can not listen to the crazies. But what do you do when you have a billion and 10% of those people are crazy? That's still a lot of people.
Yeah. This is something great. So in the early 1900s, some psychologists were trying to figure out how to help kids who were kind of violent and had psychotic tendencies, like antisocial tendencies. And they thought that, okay, we can pull them out of their environment because it's their environment that's doing this to them, right? Bad family life, bad neighborhood, they're poor, all this. Put them in a summer camp, try to do some treatment, help out, and then see if that worked, right? So, okay, can we do the environment thing? But what ended up happening was that everyone who did the intervention got pulled out of their environment, got worse than those that had not. And the reason was that they had taken a bunch of crazies and put them with a bunch of other crazies, and they all reinforced each other.
Oh, no.
This happens in prison, by the way. The same thing is going on in prison. But one of the reasons that that doesn't happen in day-to-day life, that they're not reinforcing each other, is because they're spread out. And pure distance between persons is creating an obstacle from them coalescing around each other and forming an ever-escalating psychosis. Right. Until you satisfy this constraint by creating the internet, which allows a whole bunch of people with like views to congregate online and reinforce each other. And so you're no crazy.
Constrained by geography.
Yep, no longer constrained by geography. They can all get on fucking 8chan and lose their minds until one of them snaps and shoots up a school.
God, that's wild. Like, it's so crazy to me because of, like, you always hear, like, the good thing, right? And it's the problem of the technologist who has a visionary idea and it's like, this is going to change the world. But because they're so bought into their visionary ideal, they can't see how it could be used for ill until it's too late a lot of times. Yeah. And it's like, God damn it.
Right. And things are escalating at a speed now where it might be impossible to turn back by the point that we figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, things on the internet, it's the genie in the bottle, right? Like once things escape, you can't really put it's like putting smoke. Like, how do you put smoke back into something?
Yeah, this is Pandora's box.
Right, exactly. There's a better analogy. It's nuts.
Yeah. That all is, and it's like, that's everything we've just said. All of that is like implicit in Cyberpunk.
Oh yeah,
it's just right there. I mean, maybe I'm obviously reading into this, and thinking about these things at a level that maybe the show writers aren't thinking about. But that's what science fiction is meant to do, especially science fiction that's in some sense close to now. It's meant to ask, where do I actually think things are heading?
Yeah.
Let's imagine the ways that this might end up, see how it plays out in the simulation of my mind, and then present that to people so that it can be discussed and thought about and considered. And maybe it behaves as a warning if it comes to a conclusion, like Cyberpunk does, that says that you'll create a system that perpetually objectifies people, makes them into objects, robbing them of humanity and increasing the brutality in our society with to such a degree that even if you're a good and innocent person who doesn't want to necessarily get into it, your choices are poor rebel who slowly goes insane and becomes dangerous and destructive and is a murderer, or a corporate lapdog who is also slowly going insane and becoming a murderer. Like the society becomes so dysfunctional, there is no choice but the bad one.
It's just extremism on one end of the spectrum or the other. And then you end up getting used by some middleman who plays on both sides of the fence, right? Yeah. Like it reminds you like the very beginning in the accident where his mother dies, and I don't know how old he's probably being like his early teens, likely maybe 16, 17. Yeah. And like when she's dead or dying, she doesn't know if she's dead after the car accident. you see what the hospital in this show is called the trauma team, and it comes up pretty explicit right away. But it's basically that to get proper medical care from this trauma team, you have to pay like a subscription, but there's tiers to it. And later on in the series, you hear different things like, "Oh, this guy's platinum level trauma team. You know, he's got everything." And so what you basically find out is like, oh, so to get basic human rights of like medical service, it's not even for everybody. It's for people who only can afford it, is what it comes down to. And he gets to go to like this like hole in the wall doctor's office that is not even probably a doctor's office really, and he can't even visit his own mother who's dying. And then he finds out that she's been killed, and then all he gets from her body is a can that says her name on it.
Yeah,
And
it
it's like
comes out of a
a
freaking
vending machine.
yeah, like her urn. There's a steel casing with like a label on it. It comes out of a vending machine.
Right. And so that's what this society thinks about people at the lowest end of society. And I don't know where I heard this, but there was like, it was like, if you really want to know like how cultures view people, look at how it treats the poorest people in the society, because that gives you a baseline for like where like what it believes the value of human life is. And that might have been something like a Greek ideal, but I don't remember where I read that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I agree with that exactly, because every society is going to have a certain amount of poor people, and being poor blows no matter where you are. If you're poor enough, like poverty is a sickness, and to some degree it's killing everyone everywhere that has it. So it's like, I don't know if it's such a great representative of the way that the society is. I think the question is more something like, to what degree is this society able to treat that? Like, what's the strength of the middle class? What does it have a safety net? Maybe. How does it deal with that? One way that it could deal with that is to provide incentives, like, whatever.
That's kind of telling about like the world of Cyberpunk, right? Like, it doesn't seem like there is a middle class.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's like philosophically that pops up with that scene with his mom being distributed in a vending machine, is you can ask, okay, why is that wrong? Like, why is it wrong for us to create a funeral system that is max efficiency? Right? It's not efficient having funerals or putting people in the ground and taking up land. It's not efficient to stand around all day. It's to display the body or any of these things. So why bother? Right? Mm-hmm. Do you not want the most mechanized, most capable system, the most efficient system? It's like, I would say no, because there are higher things than this.
Like, the more you described it, the more I'm like, oh, that sounds like like, that's one thing I don't think we need to automate.
That's where that's what the show is suggesting, is that the automation can go that far.
I mean,
you die in a hospital, the bed just goes like this, the body slides down, you land in a furnace, it just shakes out the stuff into an urn, and it comes out of a vending machine. It pops out the other side. There's your mom. It's like, I thought of that 2 seconds. Some engineer who has terrible people skills has already thought of this.
Like, let's streamline this process, Doc.
And if you lose an intrinsic sense of human value, there's no reason why you shouldn't go there. And that's one of the big parts of the show too, is that the show is very good at displaying how that society doesn't value life at all. There's no value for human life, in that it's replacing all the humanity with machine parts, in that even any number of people die at any given time, and it's just total anarchy, and it's seen as sort of inconsequential. Who cares? Oh, one more crazy person dead, one more whatever. It's like the Soviet Union. Like, people just dying left and right, whatever, man, in droves. And things can go there. Things have gone there in history many, many times.
It's wild. That's why we should not believe in a utopian ideal does not really get us to any sort of good future typically.
You need something higher. You need something that can
Right.
account for the inherent suffering and loss of people and terrible experiences, that creates tools to mitigate these things, but doesn't confuse the means for the end. Because
Right.
all this technology can be good in its right place, in that we recognize that these things are in service to us and that they're not the point. that,
Yeah.
that these things have to be an expression of our humanity, not something that usurps and contains and destroys it.
Technology isn't destiny, and we shouldn't let it pull us to where it wants to go. We're the stewards of it, not the other way around.
Yeah. And if some tech is actively acting against the best interests of humanity, or is exploiting our vulnerabilities, cough cough, definitely not subtle, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
Social media categorically.
And they should be done away with. We should all just sign off.
Pull that plug, right? Or just drop out, get away.
I took all social media off my phone.
Nice.
I will look at, every so often I'll get a text message from a friend saying, "Did you see the message I sent you on Instagram?" And then I'll go onto Instagram, see that I have a whole bunch of messages and notifications, and they go, "Nah," and then close it. I'm 2 steps away from downloading all my photos and throwing it all out. This is useless to me.
You should look into, if you don't care about all these apps, you should look into what's called a light phone. It's basically just like a screen. It's like an OG phone, basically, but looks more like a smartphone.
I still like my phone for things like the Aura Ring, right? I like this. This is tech that helps me track my health and all my sleep quality and these things. It doesn't distract me. There's no screen on this.
That's the point. That
right.
We another separate podcast we could do on wearable tech, because there's two delineations that seem to be happening within like the wearable space. And it's
Can I make a guess? Amazon has a screen on theirs.
They don't actually.
Oh, what? I'm shocked by that.
No, but I know why? Because they copied Whoop. Straight up, just they're like, "Ooh, that looks like a good idea. Let's make money." But they're basically just the Fitbit, more or less.
The Apple Watch, though.
Yeah, I mean, and here's the thing: it's like there's two versions of this you can go, where you can go like the accessory piece of like, where do we want our how do we want our technology to be used, right? And it's like, do you want it to be an accessory that is like, ooh, look at me, I have the new fancy thing, or like, do you want it to be this thing that provides you useful information but is non-invasive to your life?
Yeah.
The best, in my opinion, and to companies like Whoop and Oura Ring, the best wearable is the one you forget you're even wearing. It's the one you wear most often so that you get the long-term trending data, because it's not in the short term that these things are important. It's in the long term, so you can see trends and be like, ooh, it looks like during, holiday season, I drink a lot more and my sleep goes to shit. I wonder why.
I don't have that experience.
I literally just made up an example. I have no idea if that's true or has data behind it, but that's just what came to mind.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. Yeah.
But the point is, like, at least with Whoop, they're transitioning now to doing what's called anywhere technology. So they have shirts and underwear and bras and stuff that have pouches where you can take off your Whoop in like 2 seconds. So I'm doing it right now on camera so you can see it. So this is the whole sensor. This can go inside of a little pouch, either in like boxers or bra or shorts. And it slots right in and presses right up on your skin like it would normally on your wrist, but it disappears. All you have to do is take it out for charging it. Then
and you could put it like where it would be for a heart monitor. Like if you
yeah, so like the bra would go, it goes like right here on the ribs. I don't have my camera.
okay,
So like, but they're designing it so that they can measure heart rate accurately anywhere on the body.
that's cool.
It doesn't need to be like, where we used to wear those old heart rate straps for when we do the mile run or
Yeah,
whatever,
that's
and
what
then
came to my
wet
mind.
the awkward sensors and stuff. That's going away because these are really accurate these days. And like part of this stuff is like, this is where the philosophy and proper stewardship and I mean, at the end of the day, philosophy of like, what are we actually doing with this tech, and what do we want to be as a technology company? They're not trying to be like Apple and IBM and like, I want to make the best gadget that we can charge, $1,000 for the next generation.
Because
They want to be able to
have their
provide.
values flipped. Like I see with like these, it's that I get to exploit the technology to better my life. Whereas other ones are trying to figure out how to exploit me. They're using their technology as a means of exploiting me.
Right.
And it's like
And
you guys
that's the
are
fundamental
backwards.
difference of
This is like
technology.
this is BlackRock is doing this. BlackRock is a invest. It's like it's a real estate company. This global real estate company that is just buying up everything that they can get their hands on because they don't want you to ever own anything. They want renters for life because they know that they can make more money that way than if they sell a house.
There's the megacorp in beginning, right?
Yeah. And the what is it? The World Economic,
WEC
I think that's what World Economic something,
forum, or no, WEF maybe.
that might be WEF. One of the founders or something said they won't own anything and they'll love it.
Oh, I heard about this. This is with the guy who started WeWork
This
is
is
starting this
Klaus
company.
Schwab guys, I think who I'm quoting.
Yeah,
It's a
the guy's
weirdo.
he's kind of a hack. He doesn't really know what he's doing, and you know, and this crazy company is valued at like $1 billion without ever like actually making a business yet or something crazy. It's all the speculation fund bullshit.
Great.
And what and I might sound a little more harsh than I normally am, because for me, as someone who's about to be in their 30s, who hasn't has very little hope of owning a home in the near future, it's like, what the fuck? Like
Yeah.
when all of our parents had homes by the time they were in their early 20s or could have owned a home,
Mm.
if they had saved up money, it's like, okay, cool. Like, and most of the economic data shows that owning a home is what gives you economic freedom long term to be able to ride out struggle.
Yeah. This reminds I like Tesla, but for a while there, Tesla, you couldn't work on your Tesla. It was considered like proprietary software. You can't go in there and play with
And they
it.
had safes that if you tampered with it, it would just brick your car, basically.
Right. So you don't have, once you own your car, you only kind of own your car because you can't take it where you want. You can't work on it yourself. It isn't yours to play with. It's Tesla's to play with, and they get to charge you for it. But I think a judge recently actually ruled in favor of an owner of his car, saying that you have a right to work on these things. That if you
Interesting.
own it. I don't remember the details of this. It's been a while since I read about it,
I
but
think right
I
to
think that's the right
repair is a
move.
very important distinction, and this has been happening for years within the computer industry, specifically with Apple, because Apple has been notoriously bad at allowing like third-party repair shops letting them like work on Apple products,
Hmm.
and like to get Apple certified as a repair shop for like small mom and pop computer repair, it was like not feasible or not profitable for someone to go through the rigmarole to be, Apple certified, whatever the hell that means, right? Like, it's a problem, and it's like we're kind of tangenting away from this stuff, but I think Cyberpunk is kind of like this. It's like the all the way the extreme edge case out here that allows us to kind of wiggle our way back to being like, hey, look at all the problems we're facing today, because that gets us to there.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not to be like a doomsayer or something, but
No, I think
I'm,
that this stuff has been bothering me for a long time, but I think that it should bother people, and that if they're not concerned about this, then I worry that they're a little too, you know,
yeah, putting blinders on.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, kind of just one of the things that I remember, like as I finished school, one of the things that really struck me, like I had just gotten into the wearable space and was like, oh my God, this is technology I can get behind. Because like going to school for engineering and things like that, I was not really a product person. Like I liked being able to like use math to solve problems and all that kind of stuff. But like for me, being able to like, I don't know, squeeze out performance out of something or whatever, like it just didn't really strike me the most interesting way. Like to me, it was like you would look at these office spaces and the giant factories and be like, wow, look at how crazy it is that we've been able to make these hyper efficient processes to make cars or whatever, right? Like I'm sure you've seen videos of the Tesla factories and auto factories that are just basically robotic arms everywhere. It looks like something you wouldn't ever expect to see, but yet we've done it.
Right.
But then I kind of took a step back and I've been like, well, we've done all of this like efficiency stuff and like worked out every kink so that the no part is standing still for more than a second or whatever, right? But have we done that for like people? And like how do we improve the lives of the individuals that make all this shit happen? Because it's like we're wasting, like how much time is wasted, like possible outcome is wasted on people who like are burnt out, feel like they're not sleeping well, or have shitty whatever, like they're not working out enough or they're just not moving enough. It doesn't need to be working out specifically. Like the quality problem we're missing is the human element of the quality problem. It's like, how do you improve the humans that actually do all this stuff? And we've like left that up, like, let them figure it out. And we decided to say, all this we've learned with science and technology, to say, we've been doing fine forever. But instead we say, fuck it, and say, never mind. We don't, like, oh, wait, maybe if we help them sleep better and they get to work on time and they feel fulfilled at their job, such that they're not burnt out by the end of the time they like leave work, and then they go home with more energy and vitality, so that the friends and family and their kids or whoever that they get to spend their time with, they feel more fulfilled. And all of a sudden you have all these ripple effects because people feel more in control of their lives. And then all these problems that we have, that we seem like we need to get more done in the time, more done in a 24-hour period. All of a sudden we start making leaps and bounds because all of a sudden people start fixing their own shit because you let them fix their own shit and give them the ability to see like, wow, I know how to like take control of my life and do small little tiny tweaks that maybe it's only like I got 30 minutes of extra sleep, but that 30 minutes of extra sleep could be all the difference they need to start eating healthier, to have a little bit more time to go to the gym, or do whatever else it is that they think is most important in lives that has the biggest bang for their buck. It's like, but somehow we just forgot about that, especially when we had the pandemic, that we could have easily put a PSA out there for say, hey, people, go walking and it will reduce your anxiety. You'll get sunlight exposure and you'll get cardiovascular training and all these extra things. But no, we decided to just put our heads in the sand and say, nope.
Yeah, there's no room for
riles me up. Sorry.
No, I get it. It feels like people are being crowded out. That's what it feels like. Like we're pushing people out of everything. Yeah. And we just turn it all off. Let something else handle this. Like we don't even want to be there. Like I can't help but think that the nature abhors a vacuum, and the general lethargy of our generation has created one that is being filled by technology.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
It's wild, but I mean, at the end of the day, to kind of leave it on a positive note, that's why I think we're doing these conversations more now, because I think clearly we have things to say, because we wouldn't be able to talk for an hour and a half. And, it's like, okay, if there's going to be a whole bunch of noise put on the internet, maybe we can try and put something that's not just noise. And who knows, maybe we get 10 people that watch this and start thinking about it and make a change or whatever it is, or they hate it and it's fine. But like, it's better to have a hater and maybe get someone talking about it than to not ever say it at all. Right. And it's, at least we're trying at the very end of the day, right? Like you can't know your impact unless you try to have an impact, right?
I agree. With
Bam.
that, hour and a half. Want to call
I
it?
know it just flew by, honestly. Well, till next week, everyone. Thank you all for joining. For the 5 viewers that sporadically joined in here and there, appreciate you. You're not here anymore, but hey, 5 is better than 0.